evening, everyone. Beyond Benign is thrilled to welcome you to the Observe, Wonder, Think interactive green chemistry series. We will be starting now. So thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, pronouns, where you're from, along with the grade you teach. If you are an educator or your affiliation, if you have another role. Right. So tonight's presentation will be presented by Raksmey Derival and Equitable Grading in the Chemistry Classroom. So this is our agenda for this evening. We have acknowledgements and introductions. We're going to go over some of conversation guidelines. And then we're going to enter the presentation itself, in which collaboration and discussion will be part of it. And then at the end, we'll share with you some upcoming events and opportunities with Beyond Benign. So this here. Beyond Benign use a series of resources to help us put together our land acknowledgement and for education on decolonization. We encourage you to explore your own area's land history. So our land acknowledgement goes, we wish to acknowledge this unceded land on which Beyond Benign operates. For years, it has been the traditional land of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide, colonialism, and forced removal from this territory. We also acknowledge that further education is needed on our part to learn the full history of the land we occupy and all of the indigenous people it belongs to. Thank you. So I'm the this year's coordinator of the Observe, Wonder, Think. My name is Esther Hines. So I'm going to go over some of the meeting's protocols. Let's see here. All Beyond Benign events, we want everyone to feel welcome and included. By participating, you agree to treat all attendees with respect regardless of their identities. Discrimination or harassment of any kind will not be tolerated. There are no consequences for reporting unacceptable behaviors. Beyond Benign reserves the right to determine what constitutes inappropriate behavior or unfair treatment and will take appropriate action as needed. Thank you for helping us create a safe and supportive environment for all. So our format for the Observe, Wonder, Think, OWT, consists on part one, a presentation shared by tonight's guest speaker, and the second part of this presentation will be a conversation about the topic amongst participants and presenter. So we encourage participants to consider questions for our presenter and to each other, and also to share your own experiences related to the topic of the day. So our topic, as I mentioned earlier, is Equitable Grading in the Chemistry Science Classroom by Raksmey Derival. Let's see. Rags, we like to call her Rags because she's a sweetie, is a Cambodian-American woman, daughter of refugee immigrants, and mother of two Cambodian Asian sons. She graduated from Suffolk University with a degree in biochemistry and forensic science, which helped her gain industry experience at forensic toxicology and green chemistry labs. Rags pursued graduate studies in green chemistry and education programs as she transitioned to a career in K-12 education. After a year of studying under Dr. Amy Cannon and Dr. John Warner at the UMass Lowell Center for Green Chemistry, Rags spent a few years helping to start up Beyond Benign and the Warner Bachelor Institute for Green Chemistry. In 2011, Rags joined Innovation Academy Charter School as a high school chemistry teacher. She teaches chemistry, green chemistry and sustainability, forensic science, and science and social justice classes through anti-racist and culturally relevant lenses. She encourages her students to look beyond the beaker and consider chemists' impacts on the community, from its human members to the plant and marine ecosystems. In 2019, Rags was inducted into the American Chemical Society's Ola Lotte's Honor Society, considered a Hall of Fame for high school chemistry teachers in the northern United States. She's honored to be among fellow Ola Lotte's members, myself and Ann Lambert, who are, she calls us fierce green chemistry educators and advocates. That's very sweet, Rex. Rex is passionate about healing the world through kindness and science, creating positive energy in social justice movements, and empowering others to remember that they are always and in all ways greater than they think they are. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Miss Raksmey
God
Derival.
bless you. Thank you, Esther. I giggled when you said a giggle at that part of the bio. I was wondering when you were going to see that. What's up, everybody? Good evening. Thank you again for joining me tonight, joining the team as we explore what grading for equity can look like in chemistry classes, and specifically what are some of the practices that are recommended, and furthermore, what are ones I've tried, and just have some storytelling to share with you. So. Um, First of all, a little bit more about me. I feel like Esther did a really good introduction. Thank you. I did want to kind of lift up that last year I was part of the Beyond Benign Observe, Wonder, Think series with 9 student ambassadors. I was part of my role as a director of the Science Ambassadors program. And I'm not as active as I ought to be, but I will be on the GCTLC and sharing more curriculum and more lessons and stuff. But currently I kind of help share ideas on the advisory board, and I'm super proud to be a Beyond Benign certified lead teacher. And I understand that these events, a lot of lead teachers are gathering together. So it's nice to be in a safe space with y'all, with other green chemistry enthusiasts who are visionaries, who know that, green chemistry sometimes can be looked at as controversial, as Esther mentioned before the meeting started, as we were catching up. And sometimes we wonder why. But, there's a lot of controversial energies out there in the world right now. So thank you for showing up to a webinar that has the word equity boldly in its name, despite some of the other political energies we have, kind of targeting any DEI initiatives and stuff. Here's a quote that I think helps to ground me whenever I feel like imposter syndrome is coming on. This quote by Colby Kulchin. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the name, but growth happens when you do things you feel unqualified to do. So I just wanted to start with that. I don't feel like I have the answers yet. I feel like we're moving in the right direction by exploring some of these strategies. We're trying our best to open the students' eyes to not just chemistry and its impacts all around us, not just green chemistry, how to do chemistry in a more responsible way, more intentional, mindful way, where we're preventing waste and we're trying to minimize working with dangerous chemicals, the common sense stuff, things that we see so clearly. We're just trying to show the kids. And now part of that energy, I think, transfers over to us as educators when we see inequities in the classroom, especially since the pandemic. And we're trying to figure out how to still call the students in, not just to science now. Now it's let me call the kid into school. Can you show up to school now? How do we still call these kids in and try to do what's best by them through our role as educators, not just focusing on the chemistry content, but also on all the other ways we interact with students, ways we create spaces where they can feel a sense of belonging and a sense of safety to show up as their authentic selves and make the connections they need to grow as a chemist. So again, I'm not here to try to convince anyone that we should all change our grading practices to use a 4-point system. It's just an opportunity for me to share with you what my journey has looked like so far, as my school has formally adopted a grading for equity approach. I decided to follow the observe, wonder, think pattern. So for the first part of our talk, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what I think grading for equity has meant for me. And I just want to show you some brilliant student work. And when you see the work that's produced, I hope that you're hit with the same sense of awe I was at. This is why we need to create space for these geniuses to show up. So I can't wait for you to observe some of that systems thinking analysis in an iceberg model diagram. Afterwards, we could jump to wondering, what can a rubric look like to support student work like that? So it's kind of going backwards, but I'll give you the evolution of how the assignment was created to help it make sense. And besides, looking at a rubric for this specific type of assignment, we have rubrics for all sorts of different things. So what does it look like if we're assessing students on a quiz? What about a project rubric? What about a lab rubric, et cetera? And finally, we'll be able to all activate in a separate slide deck I prepared where we can share ideas. I kind of took the idea from Jamboard, Do y'all remember Jamboard from back in the day? I just made a slide deck where you can edit it and you can take over little like sticky notes to share your thoughts. And in particular, I'm hoping that we could just like use our collective ideas, our resources to share learning targets that we might want to highlight today. Maybe ones we could innovate together that really lift up green chemistry criteria and principles. And if we get there, I think it'd be great if we had access to any rubrics, whether you're using them currently or you have used them, or maybe you just found one online that you think looks good, you want to share for the conversation. There's going to be a component of the think portion of the program where you can link some rubrics that you just want to contribute. Okay, so for the observe part, here's a brief overview for grading for equity. The why really is to help students um, succeed in our classes. And that means we have to give them clear pathways, give them learning targets, give them revisions, areas for growth, so that they can show their ability to master the content. So I'm not here to grade, necessarily like how timely you are with your homework submission, although I know that preparedness is a big part of success in the classroom. I think that over my time, my 14 years as being a teacher, I started with grading systems that I was familiar with based on, being on the receiving end. And then as I've evolved and become more educated, I realized there are some things that probably need to be changed. So I think moving towards grading for equity makes a lot of sense to accurately reflect students' ability to master the content. I think one of the things that helps me do is kind of remove any biases that might occur, especially around like extra credit points. I also wonder about like skewing the gradebook negatively if I enter a 0 for an assignment that is on a 100-point scale. And if my school considers 70% or higher to be passing, that means the majority of that scale is skewed towards failing. And if a kid gets a 0 versus a 50, and both of them communicate an F, like what's that mean? So there's some confusing things I thought through like that as I stuck through the 100-point system. And this year, now that I formally tiptoed and stumbled a little bit, but still standing in the 4-point grading scale, and I feel like it definitely makes a lot more sense. One of the things that I think a lot of people talk about a lot with grading for equity is not just giving students that one chance to show their learning and that's it. They are able to look at mistakes as learning opportunities, which I know we all value as scientists and as science educators. They're able to pursue revisions, and I think that helps motivate the students to really like show up, to try really their best. Here are some excerpts I found from other advocates for grading for equity. If you're not familiar with Zaretta Hammond, she is a phenomenal author of the Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain book, and she's really quoted like in a lot of places. Something I learned from Zaretta Hammond is like, if you again tap into the students' backgrounds, their inner geniuses, and you connect this new idea to like what they already know, that's how you kind of build upon, the learning, and they kind of like master it quicker and stuff. So she really taught me a lot about the brain and how like I could leverage how the brain works in my teaching practices. I think that it's really powerful when she says that grading for equity, the way that this author, Joe Feldman, presents it, helps lift the veil on how to succeed. And it's an essential part of a culturally responsive classroom. For her to say that, like that's really big. There's another quote on the right, the top one. So for justice-centered educators who want to improve their practices with underserved students, they're on the right tracks here. You can start working on building equitable assessment tools and mechanisms to support learning. So the tools could be like your rubrics, it could be your quizzes, it could be your learning check-ins, your oral assessments, whichever way you document like tracking student growth. And I really also appreciate the quote at the bottom here, that we can enact a system that encourages revisions and redemption instead of compliance and corruption. There's one more quote, I think, following here that I think a little bit kind of like exaggerates, but I kind of get the point. So the part about eliminating irrelevant extra credit points, leveling the playing field so that what students actually know shines more brightly than whatever metallic markers they use, or maybe they had access to expensive posters, so they had the shinier posters, or other trappings or materials unavailable to all students. So you think about the inequity of access there. So I like that that was kind of called out. The how, we talked about the why, and now the how. How did my school approach it? We definitely grounded ourselves in that text, Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. And I appreciated that members of the school's Racial Justice Committee were the first ones to really advocate for this. which I'm a member of. We have admins, staff, parents, students, alumni on that racial justice committee. But then our entire team of admin did their own training, and then they collected data. They asked and sought input from staff. They actually honored what we even had to say. It feels really nice to have a supportive administrative team like that. And like I said, it's been a multi-year approach. So we're like in our second to third year. We've had PD sessions, professional development sessions where we collaborated, we've reviewed text, looked at the data within our own classrooms and stuff. Really powerful. I think that when you see the data, you can kind of see the need for the change. And for me, it was very evident when I looked at my own. We were given templates, we were given parameters, we were given chances to have conversations and collaborate with our department colleagues, especially helpful if we like teach, like the same type of class, like there's like another chemistry teacher that I collaborate with, the biology teachers collaborate together, etc. And I think at the end of the day, as long as we approach this with an open and kind mind and give each other a lot of grace, because it's like the first year we're all formally doing it, and we know that we're not going to always get things right in the first try, I think that's going to be okay. So I've been trying to, as head of the science department this year, I've been trying to tell my team, it's okay. We're just doing an experiment, trial and error, we'll adjust, like just use the same science principles. It's okay. Just, you got to make sure we offer the grace, because I think grading can be really personal, and sometimes it can feel like you're being attacked if like you realize, oh shoot, maybe something I did in the past inadvertently harmed a student. Like I know that it can come with some feelings like that because I went through it. So I just wanted to just lift up that we're all just trying to act out of a place of love and do things with grace. Why? To support the students. Why? To help support the world all through the act of love. So that's all we're trying to do. This is what I call the gem slide. I put the gems on there so you can see. Whenever I used to attend webinars, whether it was, by the author Feldman himself or other experts, or even from my own team at the school, they would give me little gems here and there, like, oh, you gotta lift this up, do this, don't do this. So I kind of collected them, and I think there's probably a better list like someone else has. I just put down top of my head, here are the ones that are super relevant for me that have been really helpful. So there are some things here that are relevant to using what I was using before, a 100-point gradebook scale. And so in such case, we talked about how if you're using 100 points, if you enter a 0 for the sum that didn't come in, that really might drag the average down for that student way more than it like needs to. If you just need to communicate the student didn't, pass, I think an F, which is a 59 at my school, well, it was a 59 last year, communicated the same thing. So I would just put like the 59 in, and some people would use a 50% mark, but we were all very hard trying to work on not entering zeros because we know how it skewed the gradebook a lot. So besides not entering zeros, we thought about how maybe sometimes extra credit can be artificially inflating the student's grade. If the grade should reflect what the student knows, and then we're asking them to like do some other side task that may or may not be related to the content, that's how we get the artificial inflations. We're trying to move away from having our biases come up inadvertently in our grading. For example, if a student doesn't appear to show up prepared, they don't seem to participate, they're not as vocal in a class discussion, if they don't engage as much, like, their level of effort may not translate to what they actually know. So we're trying to move towards just grading students on what they're able to show that they know. And with that, we don't grade like their practice shots. We don't grade their homework for enduring understanding. There's some of us leading towards doing it for self-direction because, again, I think that what's a required thing by my school, but I also think there's some value in letting students know. So you got to have some self-direction in order to like do the work and get the practice you need to succeed with some of these, these skills. So the things that I do want to lift up, I love that because students have multiple opportunities to show their learning in multiple ways. We emphasize the more recent performance first. So last semester, my school had this policy where a student could only retake a quiz once. So I had a student take a quiz on some learning targets, and they didn't do very well. They revised, we talked about it, they did better, and then they retook the exam, and then, they did better, but then they could have done a little bit more better. And then they realized their mistake, and we had a conversation about the little oral assessment. And I was like, well, now you show just because you can't take a quiz again doesn't mean that you didn't know it. And I know you know it. So would it be weird if I just like showed that you had a lower number because you didn't tell me on paper, but you did tell me verbally? So that being said, now this semester I'm being more open to like trying to work around that school constraint of you can only retake an exam once. I kind of give students multiple opportunities in multiple ways. Maybe it can't be a quiz again to honor with the school policy, but it could be again an oral assessment. It could be a separate worksheet. It could be a separate, slide deck they made, a separate presentation. They can show me, they can kind of like, teach someone else to do it. Like all those things kind of count. I do think it's important to really talk about learning targets. And that's something that wasn't always obvious to me as a teacher. We call them objectives, the goals, the learning goals, but the learning targets. I think that the clearer they are, the more student friendly they are, the more they help the students understand what they got to do to succeed. And we got to tell them, this is what you need to be like proficient. And this is what it means to be like distinguished. Like what's a 3 versus a 4 versus like, maybe not quite proficient yet. And what do you need to do to get there? So giving specific feedback, I think, is also key. Um, if you are sticking with the 100-point grading system, then try to think about using a minimum score. Like a 50% was common at my school. I think I was one of the few people that was using 59 to be like, I'm going to give you as high as I can give you, but still, communicate the F. And like, is that okay? No one really yelled at me about it. So I did that for some time before we just switched to a 4-point grade scale. And I remember asking that question of like Joe Feldman when I went to a webinar. And I was like, what are your thoughts on that? The 50 versus 59. And they were just like, just switch to the 4-point system. And now I kind of finally get it. So I hope that was enough time for y'all to screenshot as you needed to that the gem slide. This is an excerpt from a document from my school where we had already done, all these PD sessions together. And so it's kind of summarized like why we're using a 4-point scale. At the top there, you'll see the language like that falls under what proficient would be for a B versus what like an A would look like for a 4. Just wanted to emphasize for a 4, the student work needs to show complete mastery and excellence in a skill. Whereas proficient is, yeah, you show understanding or application, but like complete mastery and excellence, that's a 4. So we have this new 4-point grading scale to work with, where every assignment is graded on a scale of 4, every assignment with 4 points. However, some assignments might be weighted more than others. For example, quizzes might be weighted like twice that of like a homework assignment, or labs tend to be weighted like times 3 or times 4 that of a typical homework assignment. In our department, we do have 4 strands or categories of like thinking that we grade students under. One of them being a required one called self-direction from the school. And we also have something called enduring understanding, experimentation, and modeling. So I'm trying to figure out how do I assess students under those categories and try to like keep with the self-direction straight of 10% and also work from a place of like honoring students and stuff. So that was my brief understanding, my brief overview of how I understand grading for equity. And right now, though, I just wanted to show you an exemplar. And this is student work pulled from my green chemistry and sustainability class. It's a pretty recent assignment, actually. Students were assigned this webinar to watch. It was presented by Dr. Robin Dodson over at the Silent Spring Institute. She and her team were looking at the personal care product use among Black women and Latinas in Southern LA, which is an environmental justice community. So it's about an hour-long webinar, great information. It's a wonderful way to call students in to raise their awareness of how, like, products that they might be using every day might cause symptoms, might cause disorders and diseases, and like try to open their eyes to it. And on top of that, I really appreciated the social injustice aspect that was illuminated through her talk that I was able to kind of like illuminate for my students. So when they saw the webinar, they were given these learning targets. We had 4 of them here that I wrote on the board for them. And typically when we try to build learning targets, like we always try to look at the Massachusetts state frameworks first, the science frameworks that were published in 2016. And sometimes we don't always find something in our chemistry class for like physical sciences. We might have to go into like other areas like engineering, technology. So here we have this learning target that's in the math frameworks I kind of built off of. It's actually my 4th learning target here. But I wanted students to have, again, student-friendly language. And like, honestly, one of the things I want kids to walk away from after taking my classes, do you know how to tell if chemicals around you are good for you or not? Maybe look at, some light stuff like safety data sheets. But I even want them to consider like the stuff that you're putting on your body, maybe multiple times a day. And, sometimes we think about food too, but like through this lens, it's like the personal care products. Do you know like what chemicals are in there and what, what issues they might lead to and stuff? So that's why I developed these learning targets where, okay, let's talk about what are some diseases or disorders that have been shown to be caused by harmful chemicals in personal use products. And what are some different types of personal use products? So hopefully they could say things like, hair shampoos or lotions, skin lightening creams, hair relaxers, even like products to help you with odor and stuff are coming up in this lesson. So that connects to the third learning target because some of the injustices I put in there earlier kind of had to do with like colorism, the idea that lighter shades of skin are more attractive than darker shades, or like there's hair texture discrimination. Sometimes people have this false idea that the straighter someone's hair is, the more professional they are. And even odor discrimination, which I think looking at my students' exemplary work, you'll see they kind of put some research towards how that had ties to like enslavement history and how the stigma is perpetuated and stuff for people to feel pressured to use products that are harmful to address these things. So as students are watching the webinar, they're completing a 3-2-1s list. Here's a quick little excerpt from it. And you can see how they kind of directly address the learning targets. The third one there, though, I think is always tricky for students as I've piloted a couple of years now. And so that kind of led me to thinking about how can I help them better explain, how hair, skin color, and odor discrimination perpetuate a cycle of harmful product use. And so I leaned on a systems thinking tool called an iceberg model diagram. And it's really powerful because it helps you identify an event and then you start to analyze like deeper structures and layers that kind of lead to the event. And so you really do a thorough analysis, like you're being a detective. So I encourage students to kind of show their learning towards this learning target using an iceberg model diagram. Last year, that's all the kids got. This year, because I'm now using the 4-point system, I realized the way I wanted to grade on the rubric, it needed to like be super clearly reflected in the language of the learning target. So just this year, I revised the learning target to say, now this. I can accurately and logically explain how people are harmed by personal care products by addressing, and then here are the different sections of the iceberg model diagram. You get the patterns and trends level, the underlying structures level, and the mental models level for your standard iceberg diagram model. And now what I'd like to do is kind of show you, this is a quick excerpt of just a few of the areas, but here is a closer look at the entire work. The student asked that I kind of take their name off of it, but they chose to focus on how people develop gynecologic cancers and endocrine disruption as a result of using intimate care products such as vaginal douches, feminine sprays and powders, and wipes/towelettes. People can also develop endometrial and ovarian cancer, respiratory inflammation, and breast cancer, among other impacts due to these products. Wow, that's a lot. What? Just from using those products? So sometimes the students are teaching me things because they can pick, any products they want. And so they're linking in some research for me. And I'm like chasing all the leads down. I'm like, oh my gosh, what a great article you have found for us on phthalates, other impacts. Or like, okay, thank you for teaching me this thing about talc from Safe Cosmetics, etc. I won't get into too much of the detail now, but I wanted to kind of just point out that they called out some patterns and trends, things that occur more than once that explain why we see the event that we do. So many intimate care products are scented in order to prevent unpleasant odors. Black women in particular use a lot of intimate care products, often for this purpose, which exposes them to phthalates and talc powder. For underlying structures, I did give the students some very specific things to consider. I'm like, well, as chemists, we could think about literally molecular structures. And in this sense, we could think about the formulations, like what are the ingredients that we have building up this product. So the student kind of went in with, thoughts on the formulation, some of the ingredients of them. But a lot of times when we teach this level to like other classes and other students, they kind of think about it more through like boundaries, societal like boundaries, laws, regulations, policies, that type of thing. So this student also kind of dove into the regulations aspect of things, kind of acknowledging how some of these products and some of these ingredients are allowed in the US, but not allowed in other parts of the world. This is an 11th grade student who's doing this work. Um, Real quick, we have the mental models where they kind of classified what they considered to be unhealthy mental models versus healthier mental models. And then a bonus if they were going to go for like, doing a little bit more, kind of really showing excellence. If every level is supposed to explain the one before it, I think that sometimes we could think about what emotions might inspire some of these mental models that affect our beliefs, our values, our assumptions. So this student did choose to try to identify some relevant emotional models that might explain the mental models that they identified. So this to me is phenomenal work. This is why I'm teaching. I'm glad I showed you a little bit and then you really took off and you really like now you're teaching me things. Thank you. That's what we want, right? So like how do we call more of that in? And notice the student is doing more than just like the chemistry learning targets, are looking beyond the beaker. How do we create more space for that while we try to build up the green chemistry stuff? So that kind of brings me to my wonder. How am I doing on time so far, y'all? I see Esther talking, but I think it's muted.
How about another 10 minutes?
Okay, great. I can.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now we'll slide to the wonder part. So just to pause. Ooh, that was a lot, Rax. We just observed, what grading for equity kind of looks like, kind of means, like, according to Rax. And then we also just looked at this iceberg model where a student really went in looking at these feminine intimate care products. And then they did this amazing analysis to thoroughly understand why we see what we see. We want that level of understanding for our students. That's how we call them in to be like activists with us, to want to make safer formulations, to want to be green chemists and educators. So how do we create more of that space? So I wonder, what can a rubric look like in a 4-point system that kind of calls in that type of work, that type of thinking? And I think beyond, that particular type of assignment, what are other types of assignments that I happen to do in class where I also feel I need to be more transparent, make my learning targets more obvious, and like help make sure students know how they can kind of grow off of that. So I'm going to share with you maybe some wonderings I have on what quiz assessments can look like as well. Here's the rubric that kind of went with the iceberg model that you just saw. This is what my school calls a double point rubric. So when we shifted over to the 4-point grading scale world, we realized there were different ways we can show rubrics. And a very common one was just to define what proficient means, which means only define the 3 column. Tell the students what they have to do to show like they can do the skill. And then my students, especially the ones that tend to be A students, were craving more. They were saying, we want to be explicitly told what exactly it is on the rubric that we got to do to show that there's excellence and complete mastery in the skill. So because of that, like there's a mixture of rubrics throughout the school. Some teachers prefer to use what we call the single point rubric, where only the 3 is shown. Some people use a full rubric where they clearly define levels 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here I'm using the double point rubric. So kids first see what they need to do to earn the 3. And then if they would like to kind of go above and beyond to show complete mastery and excellence in the skill, they can glance at any information in the 4 region and try to do that. So one example could be for the event states harmful effects people have from using a specific personal care product. And to go above and beyond, maybe you show that you did additional research. You include details that were kind of beyond what the webinar showed, and you gave me some links I could actually access, and they're valid sources and they're recent and they support what you're saying. That's great. That'll be a 4 for me. So I kind of did that additional research with links kind of for like all of these areas. But then for the patterns and trends, excuse me, for the underlying structures part, where before they could talk about formulations and or regulations, if they do address both with a level of research and detail, then that would be a 4. And similarly with the mental models, if they do just, either healthy or unhealthy, that's cool. It doesn't have to be what you even believe. But if you kind of do both and label it and kind of talk about it in a way that kind of makes sense, I'll be the 4. And so the 5th level, the emotional level, kind of shows up here if students decided to kind of pursue that. And so the student that whose work you just looked at scored a 4 in all the categories. Their feedback though did not look like this. I'm moving towards using these templates more because the school is using them, but I'm still shifting away from using Google Classroom rubrics. So I'll give you a view of what the student actually saw. So here's this one line. If you click on it, like the descriptions that I had under the 4 column are all kind of here. It doesn't allow me to separate it into nice lines and, break it up a little bit. So that's a little annoying. As some specific feedback that I had for them as well. So that's kind of how they got their feedback most recently, but we're moving towards that other rubric I just showed you. What you're looking at here are some learning targets that I recently did with students in my chemistry class. So we're transitioning from my green chemistry sustainability class, which was the assignment you just saw, to now me wondering more about how do I do this in, say, chemistry class, where I have a lot more frequent quizzes and my learning targets sometimes match up with the state standards. And sometimes I had to make a smaller goals, little stepping point goals until they get to the actual learning target the standard says. So here's an example of one of those where I had to kind of make up my own smaller learning targets so I can get them to like what the standard says. And this is again related to atomic structure. So there's no standard that says that you should be able to talk about like 3 types of subatomic particles, um, or that you could draw atomic structures accurately with Bohr diagram models and electron dot structures. There's no specific Massachusetts framework that calls those things out. But to get to where we need to get to, like we need to like do these things. And this is to get to the first learning target, by the way, of like looking at the periodic table as a model and call it reactivity and stuff. So I wanted to learn from my students, because they're experiencing this change in grading in all of their classes, and they can share with me their insights from other teachers too. And one of the things that I was hearing really loudly from my chemistry students is, hey, we really want to know how to earn a 4 in quizzes. Like we would just love for you to just ask the question and say 4, do the following, and then if we could do it, we'll get the 4. All right, cool, let's try that out. So this is how it looked as this evolved. You could see on the left side, I gave the very first quiz we have is unit 0, which is our lab safety unit. And the question I asked is here on the side, based on the safety data sheet excerpt above, is it generally safe to work with phosgene in a high school chemistry lab? Why or why not? Reference specific info in the safety data sheet into your answer. I was proud of that question. I was like, ooh, they get to look at safety data sheets, look at my high schoolers, they're interpreting safety information like chemicals. I felt really good, right? And then my students are answering the questions, and I'm like grading the responses. Okay, that's definitely a 4. Well, that's like, they kind of got us a 3, but like this one had way more detail. They called this stuff, that's a 4. So it was obvious to me, but not obvious to them. So then I gave students that feedback. And then for the folks who wanted to pursue the revision and the retake, when they looked at it again, now it clearly said, 4, identify. What is it that I was looking for? I was looking for them to say the signal word. I was talking about the pictograms. What do you see? What do they mean? Can we talk about the hazard statements and which ones are the ones that's telling you we probably shouldn't use it in the high school chemistry lab? Hopefully the fatal if and hit one kind of sticks out. So that, was showing growth, and like they didn't really know what they had to do, but now it became more obvious. And that was growth for me. So thank you to my students for like giving me that feedback. Here are a couple more examples from the same quiz where like question 5 was about, hey, when should you use these particular like random items in the lab? They had a whole list to study from, and these are just the 3 that I picked for the quiz. And then on the revised version, tell me how to use them if you want to get the 4. It's like you're showing you not only do you know when to use it, you actually know how to operate that machine, like the eyewash station or the UV box, the sunshine box. It's another example on the bottom too, just kind of saying, for do this or that. The learning targets I showed you earlier when I was discussing how like I got to kind of make up my own. Here they are as they were given on the most recent quizzes. So for example, with the first learning target, yes, they could, if they just do what's in the learning targets, that's a 3. But then to go above and beyond, maybe you could talk about the specific areas that, electrons are described in, like shells and orbitals. That's like complete mastery. Like you're not just telling me, oh, outside the nucleus, you really know some specifics about that. Or maybe for this question here, you can go beyond what makes isotopes different, like, okay, different number of neutrons, but you could actually, map that out and show me how many protons, neutrons, electrons, carbon-12 has versus carbon-14. And you kind of know another skill of how to determine like, number of neutrons given like atomic mass and atomic number. That's cool. That's like a 4. So those are, some of those other examples that I'm still kind of working with. I don't feel great about it yet, but I do feel better than in the beginning of the year when I wasn't telling kids how to get the 4. So the kids seem to be cool with this now, but I kind of feel like, there's more I got to do. So some challenges I'm facing. Well, last semester I was piloting the system for the first time. I didn't know if I was accurate or not. Now looking at it at the end of the first semester, I could see, okay, I kind of met my goal of like making sure 80% of the assignments were like summative and 20% were formative. But I feel like I should balance out the types of assignments because we were very quiz heavy. And we probably should do like more labs and other assignments too. I also wonder about these other challenges. What other feedback can students offer that I haven't yet gotten? And specifically with our group tonight, what are learning targets that we can maybe make ourselves that really lift up how to build strong foundations for green chemistry, specifically the principles, how they could be leveraged, and where can transparency be enhanced? Always, I think that the answer is a rubric. So I think that it could be cool if we had a rubric showcase to like, celebrate and stuff.